Tracy's having a little bit of a challenge. I will jump in here and welcome everybody, and wanted to just say how delighted and grateful we are to have you join us today. My name is Philippe Cousteau. I'm the president and co-founder of EarthEcho International, and I believe some of you have joined us for webinars in the past, but we're really, really excited about this one and really excited about launching and announcing this partnership with Seventh Generation Foundation and the campaign for Toxin-Free Generation. As many of you may know, I am an explorer, social entrepreneur, and environmental advocate, and my work throughout my entire life has been focused on conservation and building sustainability. I'm both the president and co-founder of EarthEcho International. I'm also a special correspondent and host of a series on CNN International. Written a couple books with my good friend Catherine Berger-Ked, and I'm sure some of you have seen, like Going Blue and Make a Splash. And various other different endeavors that I'm involved in, all of them, again, with the idea that we are all about building sustainability. And, you know, growing up with my grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, I recognized from him and learning from his wisdom just how powerful young people are and how powerful they are to change the world. And truly the only ones to really change the world and create the kind of social movements that we need to build a sustainable future are our youth. And my grandfather told me that repeatedly growing up. And so I certainly was inspired by that. And we founded EarthEcho in order to do just that. And so our programs of the last few years have been really successful, and many of you have already participated in them. And it's just continues that success in putting knowledge and the tools in the hands of you all to both build a healthier and sustainable world for yourselves, for your communities, and for the environment as a whole. So from there, I would like to take us into a discussion with, let's see here, we're looking at slides. Looks like we went to the very end slide here. Slide challenge. There we go. All right. I'd like to introduce our expert panelists, and we're going to start. We're really, really lucky, guys, to have this person on our call today and joining us. And the first person is John Replogle from Seventh Generation. He's the president and CEO of Seventh Generation, and he took the reins of the organization in March 2011. And since his leadership, the company has moved quickly to recognize its growth potential and expanded into new categories, including health and beauty and baby personal care. And interestingly enough, in 2011, Seventh Generation was acknowledged as the #1 brand by the Image Power Green Brands survey. In the past, John has worked at Burt's Bees as their chief executive officer and president. He's also worked at Unilever as general manager for skincare, and Diageo, and many other leading organizations and companies in this space. In 2012, he received the 2012 Global Green Millennium Award for Corporate Environmental Citizenship. In 2008, he was awarded the Corporate Social Responsibility Pioneer of the Year Honorable Mention. He's a strong proponent of education and humanitarian causes and serves on the boards of Habitat for Humanity, Triangle Community Foundation, Duke University Corporate Sustainability Advisory Council, the North Carolina Conservation Network Advisory Council, and Dartmouth College. So we are very, very lucky, folks. He's a busy guy to have him spend some time with us today and talk about his incredible work. I'm actually going to introduce Brian and Jessica individually as we introduce them. So if we move on to the next slide, I want to kick this off with a famous African proverb: "Dirty water cannot be washed." And I want you all to keep that in your mind as we're talking through this entire webinar here. And we'll go to the next slide, because it's important for everybody to recognize that, you know, everything you put down the drain, from the things you wash off your body or the things that pass through your body, can end up back in local waterways, the ocean, and even our drinking water supply. So what's on your skin, what's on your hair, what's on your face, all of these chemicals we come in contact with in our personal body care products and that we put on our body every day come out into the environment. And the average woman in the United States uses about 12 personal care products a day. The average man uses about 6. And so we're kind of curious a little bit about what some of your personal care products are that you use, and you can certainly share some of those in the chat window to let us know. And if you go to the next slide, these are just some of the things that I use: body wash, shampoo. These are the very basic shaving creams. I have to confess, those of you that know me know that I don't shave very often, but especially when we're in the jungle on our expedition somewhere. But occasionally we use some shaving creams, some face moisturizers, deodorants, a little bit of hair wax or hair gel, toothpaste, and a little cologne. So pretty basic things, but all of these products have an impact on the health of the environment. Next slide. So if we, I think remarkably, oftentimes we hear stories from around the world that, there are folks in developing countries that don't have access to clean water and that are struggling with polluted water. Well, unfortunately, here in the United States, 20% of U.S. water treatment facilities, on average, violate Safe Drinking Water Act provisions, which is pretty scary, and some of them are minor violations. But some include high levels of arsenic, high levels of toxins, bacteria found in sewage and waste. And this could be in your own backyard. So the challenge with water and clean water in this country is very, very real. Next slide. You consider that the FDA estimates there are about 12,500 ingredients total in personal care products, varied throughout different types of personal care products. And unfortunately, at least 500 of those products that we allow here in this country are banned in the European Union, in Japan, and other countries. And 22% of all personal care products may contain carcinogens, which is scary in and of itself. Next slide. So I wanted to take this opportunity now to talk about toxins that are often found in our personal and home care products and the impacts they have on our aquatic marine environments and how you can defend your drain. And so John is here from 7th Generation to share with us and talk to us about some of the ingredients of concern that are commonly found in cleaning and personal care products and some of the alternatives that his company, 7th Generation, has been exploring. So John, you're based in Burlington, Vermont. You're calling in from there as the president of 7th Generation, the nation's leading brand of authentic plant-based household and personal care products. Can you tell us a little bit about what 7th Generation is doing to change this dynamic?
You bet. Philippe, great to be with you. Great to be with all the listeners on this really important topic. I'm so glad to have a chance to spend some time on it. 7th Generation, as you said, is based up in Burlington, Vermont. We've been around for 25 years, really trying to take care of people and the planet through a thoughtful approach to our formulation of natural household cleaning and personal care products. Go ahead.
Yeah, tell us. I was just going to say, tell us more. Tell us what that means exactly.
Yeah. So what we do is, we take a very thoughtful approach to the way we formulate, and what we try to do is balance 4 different principles. One is we try to eliminate known human and environmental health hazards. Just makes sense. It's intuitive, and yet it's a practice that many other companies don't follow. Secondly, like many companies, we formulate for high performance. Third, we develop cost-effective formulas. And fourth, we take precaution when uncertainty exists. And what do I mean by that? Well, what we do is we formulate to avoid chemicals of concern. Right? And you highlighted some of that in your introductory remarks. But not using chemicals of concern reduces the risk of harm from using the products, and ultimately what we try to do is formulate with something we call the precautionary principle. So we exercise precaution. We won't use an ingredient that has a suspected human health risk. even if the government says it's okay to use, we will take the extra precaution to avoid that. So we try to avoid these chemicals of concern.
Well, John, that's a really great point, because a lot of folks assume that legislation is caught up, and that is not always the case. So as a company, it is important for you all and to be at the cutting edge and the vanguard of research and knowledge, because legislation isn't always there to protect us.
That's exactly right. And these chemicals of concern, basically, you know, these are chemicals that can cause kind of chronic harm to people, other inhabitants in our planet, and indeed, you know, our environment, including the water that we drink. So we have to be really conscious of them. Chronic harm, what does that mean? That can be a disease such as cancer, or importantly, impairment of the reproductive system, harm to children and grandchildren of the people or animals exposed. So, you know, this is pretty nasty stuff. It's serious business, and we try to set a very high bar, set a higher standard, and lead the industry forward into better practices. So what we're trying to do is avoid these chemicals of concern, which can persist in the environment for years, decades, and even centuries. And, you know, some of these include substances that have been identified by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in their Design for the Environment program. One such example is a nasty ingredient called nonylphenol ethoxylate, or NPE. You know, it's used in industrial and household cleaning detergents. It's an endocrine system disruptor. It's suspected of causing reproductive harm to amphibians, fish, and possibly even mammals. And seventh generation refuses to use it. We've never used it. We never will. And yet there are others in our industry who make the choice to do that. So what we have to do is be just much more aware of these chemicals. Another one in some of the products you mentioned at the onset, everyday products, a chemical called triclosan. Now this has had some press recently. It's approved for disinfecting hospitals, so it's powerful, right? And imagine now, because it works so well in cleaning a hospital, people have actually put it into everyday products that children use. So, for example, triclosan is found in toothpaste and in hand soap. While it sounds, you know, good, it actually has very little demonstrated impact in these personal care products. And yet now it's showing up in our rivers, our lakes, and the ocean. It accumulates in fish and marine mammals such as dolphins, and it is an endocrine system disruptor, and in its accumulation can have a devastating impact on marine life. So that's why we try to be conscious of these chemicals of concern and try to avoid them.
Got it. It's so fascinating. And again, you know, we're so lucky to have a corporation like you all participate in this and give you perspective, because, you know, that's really where the rubber meets the road. The corporate and the consumer is where people typically interact with these chemicals, and seeing the perspective of a company that has chosen not to pursue these chemicals is very, very important perspective, I think, for our viewers and our listeners to learn about. Because we can talk about research, we can talk about science all day long, but unless it's economically viable, which you have proven it is, and unless it becomes something that works in the marketplace, it's going to continue to be unrealistic. And so that's really, really important to have your perspective. And it's not just the, you know, what I find fascinating, it's not just some of these chemicals that are used for disinfectants. It can even be fragrances, the kinds of things that make stuff smell good, can't it?
It is, and you mentioned your morning routine includes cologne, and it's interesting. You know, I'd love to understand what's in your cologne, and I think most people don't realize, because consumers, let's face it, we all love fragrance. You know, we shop with our nose, and many of us are very sensitive to fragrances, and there's a good reason why. Fragrances are of a concern. You know, there's a new report out by a women's health advocacy group called Women's Voices for the Earth, and they found allergic reaction and sensitivity to fragrance chemicals is very widespread. You know, according to their report called Secret Scents, the allergens that are hiding in our scented products, like our cologne or a fragrance conditioner used around the house, or your laundry detergent, or even your hand soap. You know, these things are hiding these fragrances, and they're incredibly sensitive. In fact, there are about there are tens of millions of people in the U.S. today who are sensitive now to these fragrances, and they're sensitized to common fragrance ingredients found in these household and personal care items. But you know, the issue is these consumers can't figure out really what they're sensitive to, because we don't have to disclose what goes into fragrance. If you look at ingredients on packaging, often it will just simply say fragrance, and instead of kind of understanding the ingredients that go into fragrance, in fact there are hundreds and thousands of ingredients in fragrances, those things are not disclosed. So it's almost impossible for consumers to discern what they're allergic to in these fragrances. And folks like Brian, scientists like Brian, who's on our call, you know, has shown that chemicals used in fragrances persist in our aquatic ecosystem and bioaccumulate over time. So we really just all got to be really conscious of fragrances.
So John, I'm curious though, why do we use? I mean, if obviously if you have access to the data that shows these fragrances are toxic, why do companies continue to use these types of chemicals of concern in their products?
Well, it's a great question, and I think there are really perhaps two reasons. One is consumers like them. Consumers demand them. You know, more and more consumers like a fragranced product today, and so many in the industry will simply follow the demand. But secondly, you know, home and personal care companies, you know, do want to try to make products that are safe, but how they evaluate the risk of harm to consumers is really measured against the kind of the lowest standard, if you will. The federal government says it's okay, then these companies will often formulate with that in mind, as opposed to taking a higher standard, a precautionary standard. So, you know, this is kind of the lowest common denominator that many of these companies use. And, you know, there's growing concern that the way that we evaluate risk, that the government evaluates risk, that the systems aren't working. They're insufficient to protect vulnerable populations such as infants and young children, the elderly, or those with immune deficiencies. I mean, you look around you, folks on the webinar today, you probably know people, if not yourself, that have allergies, and allergies are ever increasing in the United States today. More and more people are allergic. In fact, we're making our homes more of an allergy bomb, if you will, by using highly fragranced products within our homes. In fact, air quality in your home is 2 to 5 times more polluted than the air quality outside your home. So unfortunately, what's happening is the risk assessments that we have right now look at a particular substance when used as directed and alone. It's not looking at using 7 or 8 chemicals on your body in the morning when you get going, or 7 or 8 chemicals around your home as you clean throughout the day. And so it's this kind of accumulated effect that we have to be concerned about. And frankly, most companies don't formulate with that in mind. They formulate to meet the lowest common standard and to meet consumer demand.
So, you know, why this webinar, one of the reasons in my opinion this is so important, is that I don't believe this issue gets enough attention. We talk about some of the bigger conservation issues out there, and air pollution and fossil fuels and, you know, climate, etc. And this is not one that gets a lot of airtime, a lot of press, a lot of recognition from the public and people that certainly that I talk to that are really informed that this is such an issue. I mean, that's a staggering statistic, John, that air pollution, air quality indoors can be 2 to 5 times worse than air quality outdoors. I think oftentimes people think that their homes are a refuge from the allergens and the pollution outdoors, but that is definitely not the case. So how can we as consumers become better informed about this so that we can improve? And this is really important, not just the health of the environment, but our own health. I mean, there's no question that we are seeing chronic diseases rising in this country. cancer, etc. And there's a lot of concern, not only to the cost of the quality of life, but to our healthcare systems, to our economy, to our productivity. How can we be more informed?
Yeah, great. First, a great first step for our listeners is, congratulations for joining us today and learning more. I think that's a great first step. And what we have to remember is that we live in a biosystem where everything's connected. So our human health is connected to our environmental health. And we've got to understand that what we do every day impacts our health. So, the key here is really for folks on this webinar and other consumers to do their research, to get informed. There's so much information out there available to us online that you can read from really leading and trusting environmental and human health organizations. A couple I really like are the Women's Voices for the Earth, the Breast Cancer Fund, Safer Chemicals for Safer Homes, and Healthy Child, Healthy World. These are organizations that are really doing a great job digging below the surface and sharing powerful information. And I encourage anyone on this webinar to go and visit those websites and learn a bit more. Of course, you can also visit our website and learn more about our approach. Importantly, I think, though, the whole balance begins to shift when consumers vote with their wallets. And so I encourage everyone to be a conscious consumer. Know what you're buying. Support organizations and companies that are taking human health into consideration. Look for ingredient labels and know what's inside the bottle. So don't just shop by the front of the label, shop by the back of the label. Turn that bottle around, start to understand ingredients. And if information isn't available, become an advocate for ingredient disclosure. This is something we believe in passionately at Seventh Generation. We have been pushing for years and years to drive ingredient disclosure in household cleaning products, and we've made some progress. But, it's really unbelievable to us. There's no requirement today for food items and cosmetics and cleaning products that allow people to know transparently really what's in their products. So we've got to push that. And there's progress being made on a legislative level, and we need support here. There are two great platforms pushing ahead. The Cleaning Product Right to Know Act, which is being introduced this year by Rep. Steve Israel out of New York. It requires cleaning products to disclose all ingredients, including fragrance ingredients, which is really critical, and the allergens potential in them on the label. In addition, the Safe Cosmetics Act is a big piece of legislation we have got to get reformed. It's been over 30 years since this has been updated. And what it would do is phase out chemicals, many of which have already been phased out in Europe, phase out chemicals here in the U.S. With ingredients linked to cancer, birth defect, developmental harm, and again, require fragrance ingredients to be disclosed. So there's some good legislation out there. We need to give it a big push. And as Bono said, shopping is politics. The consumer has to vote with their wallet. We have the power. We've got to get engaged and drive this change to save ourselves and our planet.
Well, John, that's a great point, and we're running a little bit behind. So really quickly, though, I wanted to hear because we're going to start a little bit late, but and we're going to talk to Jessica, an individual who has really embodied this idea of taking action, especially around legislation, in just a bit. But a lot of folks assume that you have to be 18 or able to vote to have an impact, but that's really not true, is it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there are a bunch of good ideas up on the screen. I encourage people to go to We the People platform at the White House .gov site. You have to be 13, but you can let your voice be heard there. Or frankly, create your own social media campaign. So many students today are wired. They have voices. You can be an influencer. So get involved. Engage with the issue. Create your own social media campaign. There's so much opportunity here. We'd love to have you be a voice for human health and environmental health. So I encourage you all to step forward, and thank you for that.
John, thank you. I know we'll be coming back and chatting a little bit about the campaign for Toxin-Free Generation here shortly, but I wanted to keep moving along and jump out from those excellent remarks about personal care products and home care products that we interacted directly with to Brian. As John mentioned earlier, Brian is a scientist at Baylor University. He's a professor of environmental science and biomedical studies. His research is broadly interested in understanding how human activities and influence various levels of the environment and biological organization, you could say, specifically as it relates to areas that are very urban. He really is one of the leading folks that's looking at the toxins in in pharmaceuticals and in the products that we use and what that impact is on the environment. He's the author of over 100 book chapters and manuscripts in quality journals, and we are also very, very lucky to have Brian here. So Brian, I'm curious, a lot of folks assume that, and in many cases, especially in urban areas, they're right. When chemicals leave us, they go into a treatment facility. The water's treated, and then it's released. So why do these chemicals of concern continue to be a problem?
It's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things here. It wasn't too many years ago that we actually had rivers burning in the United States, and so we developed technologies to try to improve our ability to reclaim water, to treat water. And so we've done a pretty good job of addressing what we knew at the time were challenges. And things like pharmaceuticals and personal care products have received a lot of attention. On this slide, you can see some news clippings or various depictions, headlines of substances getting out of these wastewater treatment plants that just quite frankly weren't designed to remove these substances below levels that in some cases appear to present some risk to the environment. And so pharmaceuticals and personal care products are sometimes grouped together, although they can be very different types of chemicals. And as you've heard, your usage, your dependence on some of them for health and welfare, but then maybe in some cases just for, cologne or whatever, is very common in the developed world. And so one thing I would like to note is that the EPA does maintain a very good website with information on pharmaceuticals and personal care products that may be interesting to the folks on the webinar today. If we could go to the next slide, what we can discuss is, why have these pharmaceuticals and personal care products been getting the attention? Well, in some cases, let's think about it. I mean, we have more people that live in cities now than at any other time in history. And so our use of water and other resources that flow into these heavily urban areas then result in different types of waste that oftentimes flow out of those areas as well. And so even in places where water is considered fairly plentiful, we're now seeing our water cycle become transformed in more of an urban water cycle where we use water, we reuse water, and so our connectivity to the natural world, to fish, wildlife, the water we drink is becoming more and more, I think, acutely important. And so things like pharmaceuticals and personal care products are simply indicators of this, what Sandra Postel would call the new normal of sort of this urban water cycle. One of the things that we've focused on are urban rivers, as you heard mentioned earlier, that in dry parts of the country, or even in places that are kind of rapidly urbanizing, river flows can be contributed almost entirely by treated wastewater, which is then returned back into a river or stream. In places like Texas, with some drought susceptibility, there's an image here of August of 2011 where we had an extreme drought. We're still drought susceptible. The base flows into our coastal bays and estuaries are increasingly reliant on discharges from big metropolitan areas upstream. And so we've been focusing on these areas because if they're not getting diluted, and the old adage is the solution to pollution is dilution, this may represent potential worst-case scenarios for exposure to these substances. So we can go to the next slide and we can talk about this concept of exposure and how, from a scientific standpoint, we assess the impacts of chemicals in the environment. You heard a little bit about this. So the discipline that I want to present today is ecotoxicology. It's really studying how contaminants in the natural world can cause effects on constituents of the natural world, and the broadest definition includes humans. Now, it's still a very young field, but it was born out of the need to understand how various human interactions may adversely affect the quality of our environment. So ecological principles, human health toxicology, and even the study of how things work to affect pests, like entomological sciences, influenced how this was developed. This other concept I want to make sure that we're cool with is exposure, right? So exposure to chemicals includes several major factors. So how much, the magnitude, how frequent, and then how long, right? And so this is the challenge oftentimes between a beaker study and what's actually going on in estuary along the eastern shore. You're trying to partition really what's present versus what's actually causing harm. And as we heard, there are certainly many chemicals that are present in the natural world, especially in these urban areas. And so understanding things like mixtures of chemicals becomes important. Let's go to the next slide. And so one of the ways that we've started trying to understand exposure to pharmaceuticals and personal care products have been involved in some national scale pilot studies for US EPA and also the German Environment Agency. And so this concept of bioaccumulation entails a chemical simply moving from outside of your body across a membrane like your skin or maybe the gills of a fish and getting into their body. Now, depending upon how much of a chemical gets into an organism, that may present some sort of harm for its ability to live, to grow, to reproduce, to avoid predators, to capture prey. And so you see the nice image that was developed by National Geographic, the fish farm image from our pilot project. The short of it is some of these substances are accumulating in organisms. Now, this is where the field of toxicology becomes pretty important, because now we're trying to understand if this actually presents real risk or potential harm to our natural wildlife. Let's go to the next slide, please. We kind of continue this discussion for a few minutes. So we heard about risk assessment. Just want to make sure everybody is cool with this concept, that has some strengths and oftentimes does need to be updated and revisited through time. What we're trying to look at is, if you're exposed to something, does that exposure result in something that may be harmful to you or some component of the natural world, like fish or birds or frogs? And so this overlapping zone of the exposure zone and some sort of thresholds of adverse outcomes to your health or the health of ecosystems is what we characterize as risk. Now, our laws and regulations are developed to try to minimize risk as much as possible. We set speed limits, for example, so you don't increase your risk of harm. And so really risk is just trying to relate how much is present, say, in water to how much might actually cause a harm to, say, the fish that live in a stream. Let's go to the next slide.
So, and Brian, just jump in. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left.
Yeah, sure. No worries. No worries.
Jessica a chance to talk. So this is terrific, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to just kind of move quickly through this. So just more some resources for the folks. We can assess new chemicals or existing chemicals, and this is the approach that the EPA uses. As we mentioned, oftentimes this is done on a chemical by chemical standpoint, and there are real challenges with understanding mixtures. This is where the science is going. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of really where the science is at right now, which is really exciting, is that this is sort of almost what we might call intelligent ecotoxicology, and it's really what EPA is promoting as a way to improve risk assessment, to understand how certain chemical properties may interfere with substances in your body that are very important, like DNA or proteins, and then how that interaction may ultimately cause impacts to wildlife in the field. So this is really an exciting time to try to gain a better understanding of the impacts of things like pharmaceuticals and personal care products in the environment. Let's go to the next slide. So what are some other things that are going on? Well, recently there was a big paper published by people from academia, industry, and government scientists from a number of countries around the world. And really, for the first time, you saw an international effort facilitated by the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry that identified some of the major research needs to understand the risks of pharmaceuticals and personal care products in the environment. So this is exciting. You may be interested in this recent work, and here's the information here. Now, what can we do do in the future? What is going on right now? Let's go on to the next slides. We'll go through this fairly quickly and make sure we don't go over on time. So we can go to the next slide, please. EPA's Design for Environment. We heard something about this. I recommend that you check out this site. This is a rigorous peer-reviewed process on how they're identifying attributes of compounds that may be problematic. Let's go on to the next slide. So there's an active area of research. We think about the field of green chemistry. If you're not familiar with green chemistry, I recommend that you check out my colleague at Yale University's website, the Yale Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering. So this is the idea of how do we really live in a more sustainable way. Green chemistry principles can be one of those ways. Can we design chemicals that actually have intended functions but lower toxicity? Let's go on to the next slide. So here's an example of some of the recent work that we've been involved with our colleagues from Yale, and we've identified different types of potential design guidelines where if we were to employ these guidelines in the development of chemicals, we could certainly reduce their anticipated toxicity to, say, fish or the organisms that fish eat on. Let's go on to the next slide. We've only got a couple more and then we're done. Take-back programs. I want to introduce you to the DEA's Drug Take-Back Program, which is really taking unused medicines out of the hands of people that might actually abuse them. CDC sees this as a national epidemic, and it can also decrease the loading to the environment. We can keep on going through the next slides here. I've just got a couple slides left. You also will see different types of take-back programs being employed more and more in your local municipality. And while this may not address what you actually put in your body directly, say in soaps or detergents, it does actually address unused materials like drain cleaners and corrosive cleaners that sometimes are just sort of dumped down the drain. So try not to do that. Participate in take-back programs. Let's finish on the last slide here on constructed wetlands. This is a real exciting development where we're seeing constructed wetlands being used more and more for wastewater polishing or treatment, and even in areas where they have to reuse wastewater for other purposes. And so we're really excited about the active work going on in using constructed wetlands because they can improve water quality, address some of these contaminants of concern, and they also provide great habitat for wildlife at a lower energy cost. So I want to go ahead and just thank you today. We can kind of go on to the next slide and keep on going through the presentation of the next presenter. But thank you again for your attention, and I hope this information has been helpful as you try to identify some of the things you can do to work with safer chemicals. And here's some more of my thoughts on some of our recent efforts on the topic that may be of interest as well. Thank you again.
Brian, amazing. Thank you. You know, it's so we've had an opportunity to learn a little bit about a company's perspective and looking at these issues that affect us, all of us, every single day, to dig through some of this incredible research that's happening. And the good news is that this research does exist. It exists out there. This is the type of research that a lot of companies are looking at, companies like Seventh Generation and others that are taking into consideration how to create their products. And for me, you know, the next question then is, what does that do to us and our bodies as people, and what kind of an impact does that have in our daily lives? And so we're super excited and very lucky to have Jessica Assef here today to talk, the co-founder of Teens for Safe Cosmetics, to talk to us about her experiences in this type of world. She's a student at New York University's Gallatin School of Individualized Study, where she's studying public health, documentary film, and social activism. As I said, she's a co-founder of Teens for Safe Cosmetics, which is now Teens Turning Green. In January of 2005, when she was still a young woman, now she's president of the Gallatin Green team, and she's helping to launch Teens Turning Green in New York. She's worked on lots of different projects, from smoking cessation to AIDS, etc. And she's actually produced 2 short documentary films on the HIV/AIDS crisis. She's working on a documentary film right now about the toxic beauty industry. She's received the 2006 Brower Youth Award, the 2006 Heart of Marin Youth Volunteer of the Year Award, 2008 Green Globe Youth Award. So really just an incredible leader already in this world. So Jessica, tell me a little bit about this body burden, the human toxin project that you were participating with when you were 15.
So I was approached when I was 15 years old, and I was trying to figure out how to go about changing this issue. I was approached by the Environmental Working Group, and they asked me if I would donate a sample of my blood and urine to this teen body burden study, which would test my blood and urine for chemical compounds, levels of chemicals found in cosmetics particularly. So I gladly agreed. It was like the first time I'd ever donated blood before, but it was totally worth it. And I was one of 20 teens tested, and I was able to learn the levels of chemicals in my own body, the levels accumulating through the use of toxic cosmetics and personal care products. So to me, I mean, many people wouldn't be as excited as I was to participate, but for me, this was just the opportunity to show that we are the human guinea pigs when it comes to this issue, and I don't see why we need any other evidence besides the fact that these chemicals are accumulating in our bodies and in waterways to ban them from use, but apparently that's not enough. So it was just a really good opportunity, and if anything, it was very frightening to learn that I have, above average levels of parabens compared to the other women tested, and, all of these chemicals were found in my body, and they're also found in everyone else's body that has been tested for them, especially phthalates and parabens and things like that. But to me, the facts are empowering because it's all we need to know to take this issue to the next level and really demand change.
And so what are these types of chemicals? I mean, as you pointed out, you're 15 years old. You find out that there are all these kind of chemicals that can have immune suppression, it hurts your immune system, they can hurt our reproductive system, our hormones, our endocrine system, the chemicals in our bodies that naturally occur can be disrupted. What did you do about it?
Well, all it took was learning that the mascara I'd been using for years contained a chemical used to wax airplane wheels. That was the first thing I ever heard when I learned that the FDA doesn't regulate this billion-dollar industry. So that to me was enough to be like, wait a second, why am I putting this on my eyes, And it went from there, just learning that, over 1,200 chemicals have been banned by the European Union, and the U.S. has only banned 9 so far. So companies are using chemicals in our products, but they have other formulations for Europe. And I just learned about this issue, and I was using, tons of products, and everyone around me was using these products. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and growing up, makeup and all of that was kind of a rite of passage. It's almost like, a bonding activity, go get your nails done with your mom or have makeover parties, things like that. But to learn that there was no safety and safety just wasn't a priority, it made me so angry. I was actually heartbroken. It's almost like learning, the person you love is dangerous. The products you love are dangerous. It just felt wrong.
That's a great point. One feels a little bit betrayed maybe by the government and by legislation that unknowingly we're putting these things on our bodies that can affect our health for our entire life. So you took action, and everybody on the webinar, reason we're so excited to have Jessica join us is because she's a great example of somebody at 15 years old who said enough and said, I don't have to take this. I'm going to do something about this. And so
exactly.
really took action from a legislative perspective and made real changes.
Well, I mean, I had to figure it out. It was pretty difficult to just take on this issue considering I was fighting against a multi-billion-dollar industry, but to me there wasn't any other alternative. Like, in learning all of these facts, I couldn't just sit back and be like, oh, it's all fine, I'll just wait around for government to take action, because I had little faith in government after learning about this issue. So to me it was just like a responsibility. There wasn't any other solution than to just like do whatever I could, but it was definitely a process. But the main point I want to push for is that there's really nothing special about me. Like, there's nothing that sets me apart from anyone else that's, in this webinar or listening in or anywhere. I just feel like we were misguided in the sense that we don't think we can do anything when we can. And even as it was said earlier, like, consumerism is a form of activism. Even choosing to buy one product or another, that is an act in itself. That is activism. So we're all activists. It's just how we choose to respond to the messages that we learn. So for me, when I was 15, I learned about all of this. I was very fortunate to live in a place like Marin County in Northern California, where everyone is so passionate about sustainability and organics, and the main place to be on Sundays is the farmers market. So in that way, we were all informed with food. but we weren't informed about the personal care products and the fact that this is just as important of an issue. What you put on your body is just as important as what you put in your body. So I started by just bringing together teens. I spread awareness about this issue. I just told everyone I could, and then I just brought people together because I couldn't think of anything else to do to really just like, take this on. So I got a bunch of teens together. We formed this coalition. We just got really educated, and we learned everything we could about this issue. We created collateral materials. We put on events at the local malls. We put on green fashion shows. We put on, street protests. Any way we can to just spread awareness about this issue and generate media. And that was the most important. So for me, it was just getting this issue out there in the public sphere, but also just making this an issue that is written about in local magazines or in newspapers, or just making it something, giving it an avenue to be absorbed. And then a senator approached me and asked if I wanted to help work on this bill, SB 484, the Safe Cosmetics Act of 2005, which is the first piece of legislation regulating this industry. And of course I said yes, but I was like, I'm 15, I can't even vote yet. Like, what do you mean I can get involved in legislation? And we actually were able to lobby a few times at the California state capitol. We just kind of showed up. We didn't have any meetings or anything. We just showed up at the capitol on like a Tuesday. I totally ditched school, but mom and dad, it's worth it. And I just knocked on the doors of senators, gave them all of our collateral material, and just looked them in the eye and said, how could you be against this piece of legislation which would essentially just require cosmetic companies to disclose known carcinogens to the public? That's all. It's just, oh, if you're using carcinogens, you would think that we had the right to know, but apparently that just wasn't thought of yet. So when we talked to these senators, they looked at us. We were just a group of teens. We had no hidden agenda. We weren't here to, lobby for the wrong reasons. We just believed that health was most important. And in that way, they listened. And it was amazing to realize that senators all over the world, they actually want to hear from young people. And you don't have to vote to make a legislative impact. All you have to do is show up and just demand to talk to them. Basically, my main strategy throughout this has been to just not take no for an answer. Because if you do that and you see your mission throughout, then there's nothing that'll stop you from getting what you need to get done.
Well, and it's been so impressive, Jessica, what you've been able to do. Now, I want to keep moving, though, so we can get to questions, because I know we've got a lot of questions for you guys. I mean, from legislation, making legislation happen, not taking no for an answer, doing films. I know on the next slide, it's you've been involved in films and documentaries. If you could tell us a little bit about that very quickly, and then we're going to jump into how each of our viewers and listeners are able to actually create their own documentaries, short films about what they're doing.
Yeah, so I've been using film because to me it's the most powerful tool, because you can't really, argue against these facts when they're put in your face in a creative way. So I've created some short films myself. I made a film about an Abercrombie and Fitch protest I did a few years ago, and it still gets comments, 2 years down the line. People still are commenting and talking about it. But I was approached by filmmakers to be one of 4 activists profiled in this new movie called The Human Experiment, where basically, instead of just presenting this issue as this really sad, failing type of thing, it's showing all of these people who've devoted their lives to making a difference and to, use the information they've gathered to actually become activists and tell their stories. So I'm excited to be in The Human Experiment. It'll be premiering soon in film festivals, and it just showcases the multitude of strategies I've utilized to get this issue to the public. And
so where can people watch the body burden film? Is that on YouTube?
Well, the trailer's on Vimeo, actually, if you just search body burden, but I'm still working on it. I've been utilizing different social media and experimental type of labeling strategies to try and see what works best. But I've filmed everything I've done, so that's just kind of...
So y'all can watch, people can at least watch the trailer on Vimeo if they just look up body burden.
Definitely, and I'm still making films now. Actually, I'm working for a company. We make everything with 5 ingredients or less. We're called SW Basics, and we're using film to showcase all of our sources because we believe that you know, you should put everything that you're using in a product on the front label. We don't put anything on the back, and you should be so proud of your sources, because you can be if you source from small farms or only use organic. So we're working on a project now where we're making films about all of our suppliers, because we want to show the positive end of the spectrum.
Well, it's terrific. Just really, what you've done is so inspiring to me, to everybody at EarthEcho, and I know everybody listening. And part of, as we wrap this up and go to questions, before we do real quick, I wanted to invite John back to talk quickly about something that we've partnered with the Seventh Generation Foundation as a way to make it easier for you all to share with us what you're doing to create a toxin-free generation. John, if you're still here with us, I'd love you to explain a little bit about what we're doing.
Well, simply what we're trying to do together is invite people in our listener group and across the country to be the next Jessica, you know, to have a voice, to get engaged. There's a great way to do it. We're asking you in celebration of Earth Day to create a short video. There's a great platform where you can engage us. It's seventhgeneration.com/EarthEcho. You can go there. If you're 13 to 22, create a video, 30 seconds or less, one entry per person between now and May 24th. Love to get you on there. Chance to win prizes as well. We got GoPro cameras, Patagonia gift cards, all sorts of good stuff. We want you to get involved, get engaged, and show us what you're doing to be part of the toxin-free generation.
Yeah, this is I'm unfortunately, because I'm involved with EarthEcho, I'm not allowed to join this myself because some of those prizes look pretty awesome. And this slide here is all about what we recommend for those of you who are curious about what you can do, things like Jessica, as John said, or any other types of projects. You can download our action guide, the Down the Drain action guide at waterplanetchallenge.org. If you go to the next slide, here are some ideas about the types of things you can do. Of course, make a PSA. Talk about how you're limiting one or more toxins from your daily routine. You know, some of the questions that people have asked about is are these things like triclosan, are they published on the back of products? Can you see them on the ingredient list? And I believe the answer to that is yes.
On triclosan, yes. There are many others you can't, but when you use it in toothpaste and things like that, it will be an ingredient. But there are all sorts of hidden ones that you can go discover. You know, create a film, shout it out, get involved. We'd love you to, you know, protect what goes down the drain and what ultimately goes in your bodies.
So all sorts of things you can do yourself. Looking at those products, you can you know, work with folks at your school to create a policy, take a little video about how you're doing that. Really tell us any idea that you have, 30 seconds or less, and it's really, really easy and it's fun, and there's some great prizes involved. So these are just some of the ideas that I know you can engage in, and we're super excited to see the different types of things, the rest of the things that y'all can do and share with us for this to create a toxin-free generation. So further to that, I wanted to take a few minutes here. We're almost done. Our time is pretty much up, but I did want to take a few minutes to talk about where we stand with your questions. And I've got a list of questions here that we're very excited about. Thank you so much for sending in questions, and I'm going to open this up. Is there anything, John, John or Brian, that you think we should be looking for in on ingredients list? Like, what is a good rule of thumb when we turn over a bottle, we're reading the ingredients? After this webinar, we're all much more engaged and educated about this issue. What should we be looking for?
I'll give you a quick hint. Jessica's called out a couple of them: parabens and phthalates in personal care products. They're nasty. They often carry much longer names like methylparaben. There are anything that is really long and hard to pronounce typically is something you should be concerned about, especially if there's a dash and then a number after it, you know, because that means it's been made in a lab, it's from petroleums or some other synthetic formulation rather than from plants. So those are some ways to know. Again, there are a lot of places, resources you can go to these great environmental working group or Women's Voice of the Earth have many of the other ingredients to look out for.
That's a great rule of thumb. It's definitely one that I follow, which is if I can't spell it or can't read it, can't pronounce it on the back of a product list, I try and avoid it. Brian, do you have any top 5 or 10? Another question that we have from some of the listeners. Do you have a top 5 or 10 chemicals that you try and avoid across the board?
Yeah, I think when you start thinking about what you're trying to avoid, perhaps what I've been doing more than anything is looking at the compounds that are actually getting into the environment. And I think it's kind of tough because we're trying to make the best decisions, and sometimes something may not be as problematic for human health, but it might be more problematic for the environment. And so we're going to still say that we're going to push the science forward to try to understand the issue, but I really benefit, Philippe, from the Design for the Environment page at EPA, so I would really recommend that your viewers here to the webinar would make best use of that resource.
So I know on the slides, if we could flip down to the page that has further resources, everybody can take a look at that. There you go. These are some of the great resources that we recommend for folks. Thank you, Brian. Let's see, another question. Well, a quick one that I can answer from folks who want to be able to share this with other folks, this webinar with their friends and teachers. And yes, anyone will be able to access it. It's recorded. It will be placed on EarthEcho's website and posted, and a link will be sent to all participants. So another question actually was directed at me. Do you know of any examples of student social media campaigns against toxics or defending your drain ideas? And as I mentioned just a few slides ago, absolutely. We like to refer everybody to our Down the Drain Action Guide that's on waterplanetchallenge.com or EarthEcho's website. You can reach it also through earthecho.org. And that's a great, terrific tool to be able to come up with some ideas and a process called service learning where you go through and decide and determine different opportunities to take action. Another question that we have, let's see, we've got so many great ones. Why are so many of the environmentally friendly products more expensive than other brands? John, what do you think?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is what we're trying to do is be much more conscious of the ingredients we use, and they are naturally derived rather than synthetically derived. Many of the value brands basically use petroleum as a foundation, and they're cheap to build in a lab or in a factory. We harvest bio-based or plant-based ingredients, which actually cost more. We also are earlier in our stage of development. Natural products are just emerging. We're just gaining scale, and as more and more consumers choose us, the price will come down. And third, and importantly, is packaging cost. We try to buy and use sustainable packaging, post-consumer recycled plastic when we have to use plastic, instead of using cheaper virgin plastic, which winds up in the landfill. So those are 3 reasons, and something consumers can do is start to purchase and help us get the cost down over time.
So it's a supply and demand issue, but I would also argue for all of our listeners and viewers that, in many cases, while we front load an investment, in other words, we may spend a little bit more money on healthier food or a little bit more money on healthier products, that pays dividends in the long run. So while one product that has a lot of chemicals that are toxic may be a little bit cheaper, think about the costs to your health. Think about the cost to the environment. And I don't think anybody will argue that disease is worth any kind of a savings of a few cents or $1 on a product, especially the types of chronic disease that have been linked to some of these types of ingredients, including things like cancer. No amount of saving a little bit of money is worth exposure to those products. So I really encourage all of our listeners and viewers to think the long term when you're spending money. And that includes food, products, a lot of things that we do in our daily lives. What are the true costs of those products to our health and to our wallet in the long run? So everybody, our time is up. Thank you all so much. We're so excited and grateful that you were all able to spend some time with us today. We would really like to thank, of course, our funders and partners, Seventh Generation Foundation for making this this whole webinar and all of this possible, for being such a responsible citizen and inspiration. I'm a big fan, have been for a long time, even before we started working together. And for the Toxin-Free Generation campaign, we're super excited to see about all the different things that you all will be able to share with us about what you're doing. I'd like to thank Kathy Berger-Kay and Associates, of course, and Free Spirit Publishing for our partnerships with them and a lot of the data that we have here in the action guide, the Down the Drain action guide, and through our books Going Blue and Make a Splash. They are just have been wonderful partners, and of course our incredible panelists, Brian, John, and Jessica. You are all an inspiration from a consumer perspective. Seventh Generation, thank you. From a scientific perspective and a knowledge perspective, Brian, the work that you're doing is really second to none. And Jessica, what incredible work you've done. I mean, it makes me just feel really lazy when I'm thinking about what I was doing as a high schooler at 15. I definitely wasn't passing laws and creating films. It is absolutely incredible what you've done, and all the folks around the world that you've managed to inspire. And you know, I think for all of our listeners, this is a really important message too from Jessica, that you know, she's managed and she has turned that passion and what she did as a volunteer into a career path and into a job. And I think that that's really important, that these types of passions that you have at your age, younger, as you get engaged, really does have future potential to be a lifelong pursuit. And I encourage you all to take inspiration from Jessica and her work to recognize the power that you have to change the world, and then to go to seventhgeneration.com/EarthEcho and join the Toxin-Free Generation campaign. Share a story about what you're doing, win some great prizes in doing so, and we look so forward to the next webinar. We thank you all for everything that you're doing. To everybody listening, you are the heroes of today and the hope for tomorrow. And with that, we will conclude this webinar. Again, have a wonderful afternoon or morning, wherever you are calling in from, and we hope to hear from you and to learn from you very soon.
Thanks, Philippe. Nicely done.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much for joining us. So grateful. So grateful. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Cheers. You too.